Ebola, SARS, HIV, swine flu. All of these diseases have plagued humanity in recent times, and all have had an effect on modern medicine and on how the public reacts to new diseases. But none of these can compare to the pure madness created by the most recent epidemic that has befallen humanity, COVID-19, the coronavirus. Now, I'm sure you're all tired of everyone talking about the virus and how terrible it is, but this video isn't trying to tell you that the virus is going to bring around the end of the world or anything like that, but is more my attempt at a comprehensive understanding to the virus and its effects on not only the individual, but on day-to-day life, the economy, and on the media, as well as my personal opinions on current events going on considering the virus. I don't intend on spreading any more fear for the virus than the media already has, but I'm rather trying to do the opposite and educate you, the viewer, on the current situation as of March 2020. I think the best place to start is the origin of the virus. So let's go back to the beginning, shall we? The date is November 17th, 2019. The location? Wuhan, China. An unnamed person reports that they're not feeling well to their doctor. One of the many questions asked is if the patient has recently visited a wet market. The patient responds that they haven't visited a market. A wet market, for those of you who don't know, is a kind of market in China in which fresh foods like fish, meat, and produce are sold, as opposed to a dry market in which dry goods such as fabrics and electronics are sold. This report from the patient goes unnoticed by their government. As time goes by into early December, several more cases come up in which people are experiencing similar effects of an unknown pathogen as the previously stated patient, a few of them reporting that they have indeed visited the market. Now, we know from hindsight that this disease was a result of a human consuming the flesh of a wild animal, and that the most likely story is that one of these people had contracted the disease via eating a wild animal, and maybe had not suffered the side effects and thus spread it unknowingly throughout their day-to-day activities. This suggests that the virus was capable of spreading between humans and not just through the consumed meat. We can't say for sure what was consumed, as we don't know, but the most likely candidate that spread this disease was a bat, a known carrier for other strains of coronavirus, as well as a common food item in China. Soon after, the government begins to pick up on the trend of similar cases between individuals in Wuhan, China. Eventually from this, the Chinese government was able to trace the source back to the market. On the 26th of December, a whole month after this had supposedly started, the government was able to label this disease as similar to the 2003 SARS virus which ravaged through China, but hadn't labeled it as a coronavirus. Following this drawing of similarities, the government began quarantining individuals suspected of carrying the new pathogen, but hadn't taken into account that people may not be showing signs of sickness. In the next following days, one of the doctors tending to the quarantined patients and reporting on their conditions to the government criticized them, stating that they had botched the containment of the virus. This is due to new cases popping out throughout Wuhan, China. Subsequently to this, due to the government of China being the government of China, the doctor was arrested for fabricating stories and disrupting the social order. Li, the doctor who dared stand up to his oppressive government, later not only became ill with the same virus he was attempting to treat, but succumbed to it and passed away in the following weeks of his arrest. I and many others have speculated this as another example of the Chinese government silencing their citizens in order to maintain the power over their people. But we have to ask ourselves, was maintaining that sense of power over their own population really worth the epidemic that's now spread to every corner of the globe? In my opinion, Li's brave words criticizing his government's poor efforts of containing the virus echo throughout the world now more than ever. And in hindsight, I think that if the government instead took this criticism and contained anyone who showed any symptoms of the virus, as well as those exposed to those people showing symptoms, instead of being, well, the oppressive Chinese government, this outbreak could have easily been contained, and the world wouldn't be in the state that it is in today. With that in mind, let's continue. On January 7th, 2020, the virus had claimed its first victim, a 61-year-old man, and this was prior to Li's death. Following the death of this man on January 7th, many citizens around the world began crying out on the outburst of reported cases in China. This outcry was brought with censorship by the Chinese government, as well as the authorities investigating those who were spreading false information. Finally, on the 8th of January, Chinese scientists announced that the disease that was spreading was another form of coronavirus, labeled COVID-19, one like that of the SARS coronavirus, which had killed many during the early 2000s. Going on from there, the World Health Organization listed travel warnings for tourists visiting China that there was a recent outburst of a virus, and those visiting China could potentially be at risk. Following this, cases outside of China began to be reported. The first few countries to report this virus were Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. I believe that due to poor containment procedures and overall hushing on the news of the current virus spreading by the Chinese government throughout China, the infection continued to grow and people remained unaware of what was happening. And many tourists from around the world unknowingly were also infected with the virus. These tourists soon went back to their home countries, and thus, the beginning of an epidemic had started, which brings us to where we are now. At the time of recording this, many countries are currently struggling to cope with the virus. One of the main examples of this is Italy, which has enacted quarantine laws that state that civilians aren't allowed to leave their houses. With Italy being on complete lockdown, this has left its civilians feeling downtrodden and lonely. But citizens of Italy are showing their support for not only one another, but for their country by making videos of themselves singing the Italian national anthem across buildings to show their unity and support for each other in such a dire time. The country I live in, America, has seen many rapid changes in the past few weeks due to the virus. President Trump has put many travel bans on national flights. The CDC is currently updating Americans on YouTube about the state of the virus and what they can do to prevent it from spreading. And worst of all, many companies have decided to close their doors due to the threat that the virus poses not only to employees, but also to customers. Like many other Americans, I have suffered from this, as my workplace has closed down until April, and to boot, my school seems to be shut down for the rest of the school year, with classes being moved online, which leaves me with no money and nowhere to go. However, the one benefit I have from this is that I have a hell of a lot more time to make videos now. Into the apocalypse we go. Is this super zoomed in? Nope. Here we can see that the highway that I go down normally to get to a lot of places is a lot emptier than it usually is. And parking lots for supermarkets were packed with cars, with people coming in and out of the stores with loaded carts. Many of them having toilet paper. On Saturday the 14th, me and my father went down to our local Woodman's, which is a large chain of massive grocery stores. When we got there, the parking lot was again full of cars, and the inside of the store was even worse. Boxes were scattered around the store, people were everywhere, and signs were posted everywhere stating that a family could only take 1 pack of toilet paper per family. Now, for those of you out of the loop, you may be wondering why those signs are even up in the first place. And I was too, until we visited the toilet paper aisle. Woodman's toilet paper aisle, like many of their other aisles, is usually stacked to the ceiling with stock, but when we reached it, it was nothing but empty shelves. I honestly have no clue why it seems like everyone is stocking up on toilet paper, as it's not like people have to shit 24/7, and neither does the virus make you shit 24/7. But yet, people are treating it like these are the last rolls Earth will ever see. One article I read states that the reason why so many people are stocking up on toilet paper is because their subconscious becomes more sensitive to the idea of disgusting things during this pandemic, and since taking a good old number 2 is generally considered disgusting, people tend to stock up on toilet paper. Not only was the toilet paper sold out, but all of the GT's kombucha was gone too. I was honestly more pissed about the kombucha than I was about the toilet paper, as I'm a huge fan of kombucha and I love drinking it, and I wanted to have some to drink at home. Now, I don't know why so many people are buying so much kombucha in mass bulk, but my theory on this is that people think that the probiotics in the kombucha will help fight off the virus, or at least weaken its effects. Frozen pizzas, Hot Pockets, peanut butter, hand sanitizer, and pasta were also either low on stock or completely gone. I honestly think a lot of people were overreacting to the situation, going as far as to have fist fights over toilet paper. And we've all seen reports on the guy who bought an entire garage's worth of hand sanitizer to resell at a higher price. Now, this guy got all the hand sanitizer he purchased taken away from him, and it was given away by the government to people who need it more. And I fully support this move on the government's behalf, as profiteering off a crisis like this is a really shitty thing to do, and this should serve as a warning to other people trying to do the same. A personal experience I've had with this overreaction has been people stealing hand sanitizer from my workplace, to the point at which we had to stop having bottles of it lying around. My mother, who works at a store that sells liquor, not only had a massive rush of people coming in to buy alcohol like it was going out of style, but also had to restock their Everclear shelves multiple times due to people buying it to make hand sanitizer. One of the worst things that she had to experience was her job as a wine taster and a class leader being closed down due to fears of the spreading virus. Similar to this, a friend of mine's parents are both out of work, along with many other kids' parents across my county, leaving them wondering how they're going to be able to make ends meet during this crisis. Another struggle that comes with the lack of work right now is that since funds are so low, people are struggling to afford basic amenities like food. But my city isn't the only one affected by the virus, no, far from it. I'd like to preface this by saying that I'm sorry, first of all. I planned and followed through with an interview with my friend Spam, who lives in a region of the US that has seen a much higher rate of the corona cases than many other places. I unfortunately couldn't include the interview with Spam because OBS decided to be an absolute dick and not record his audio, but I'll give you guys a rundown of the interview anyways. The first question I asked him was if the virus had impacted his family anyway, or if anyone in his family had gotten sick. To which he responded that though no one was sick, him and his family were taking precautions to not become sick, especially his grandparents. The next question I asked him is if the virus had changed his day-to-day life in any way. Spam responded by telling me about how he, like myself, was also out of school and that he was pretty much stuck around the house all day. The next question I asked was a comparison on how his life is now compared to a few weeks ago. In response to this question, Spam talked about how his family was faced with more uncertainty than ever before, as his parents were unsure about their family's physical stability as well as their future wellness. He also explained to me about how his father, who works as a psychiatrist, now has to meet with his patients over video calls rather than in person due to risk of infection. I then asked Spam on whether or not he was more afraid of the virus or more afraid of the way people were reacting to the virus. Spam told me on how he was only worried about the virus in terms of his grandparents' health, and that the worst fear was the effects of the presence of the virus was having on people, and shared a photo with me of an aisle in his local grocery store. It was almost completely empty. Here's that image now. We also agreed that the worst thing this virus's effect was having was on the economy, as it was making stocks and the Dow Jones plummet alike. I then asked him, in your opinion, what do you believe is the best way for people to stay safe and healthy during this pandemic? Spam told me that cleaning oneself and practicing social distancing was probably the best ways we could stay safe. And that pretty much concluded our interview with Spam. I'd like to thank him personally for helping me out with this portion of the video, as it's a very important part, and I'm extremely sorry for the inconvenience that was made by OBS. Now, you may be asking why people are so afraid of the coronavirus, and honestly, I don't think the fear stems from the virus itself. If you're not an older person and your immune system isn't compromised by things like AIDS or diabetes, the virus isn't really that much of a threat to you. The worst it can do to you is give you symptoms akin to a common cold. But if you aren't fortunate enough to have a strong immune system, it can get pretty bad, from severe difficulty of breathing to fluid filling up the lungs and possibly even death. If you are an at-risk individual, I advise you practice extreme caution during these times. But listen, hear me out. Statistically speaking, the common flu is responsible for 61,000 deaths in 2019, while the coronavirus has only killed approximately 7,154 people. That means that the virus has only killed about 12% of the people that the flu has, and don't get me wrong, any possibility of death from a virus can be scary, and I'm not trying to minimize or blow over the suffering and death that this virus has afflicted, but I'm trying to explain that it's not nearly as much of a threat as many people think it is, and yet you still see people losing their minds over COVID-19. So why are people so terrified of the coronavirus? I think the main source of the anarchy and fear that has been recently circulating throughout the world is a result of misinformation from social media and fear-mongering by the mainstream media. I understand that media outlets like Fox or CNN exist solely to report the news, but you have to remember that these are ultimately corporations looking for the best way to keep their viewers glued onto the TV and to the news so that they can make as much money as possible. And that the best way to reach this goal is to blow things way out of proportion. If you look at the news as of recent, I guarantee you that the majority of the reports that these outlets are going to be making are on the virus, or some update on the virus. Now, remember how I started off the video talking about the old plagues that people were terrified of, like Ebola? Remember how much the media was covering Ebola and making it out to be this world-ending, terrifying plague that would infect every person? Now, do you remember how it didn't? Exactly. Again, I'm not trying to minimize the threat that this virus could pose to some people, but at the same time, people everywhere are overreacting to the point that fear has become the true epidemic plaguing our world, and not the coronavirus. I mean, look at the economy. Name a company whose stocks are public, and I guarantee you their prices are plummeting by each day. Hell, the Dow Jones has dropped by more than 2,000 points since Friday the 13th. And the amount of misinformation spreading across social media has people fighting over goddamn toilet paper. I mean, look at this. Is this what we've come to? Fighting over rolls of toilet paper? What happened to critical thinking or common sense? I mean, the amount of people in my city buying guns because they think that someone's gonna raid their house, it's insane. Now, here again, people have calmed down since the 13th of March. But still, the tension in my town is so fucking thick, you could stick it with a knife. Which leaves the question, what can we do to fix this? In mine and many actual professional opinions, the best thing we can do is just keep calm, wash our hands, practice social distancing, and isolate ourselves. Which is stuff I feel like every person already knows. If you're at risk, try to remain as isolated as possible and attempt to get assistance in getting your basic items like food from friends. If you're sick, please don't go to work. Just call in, it's not worth it. If you're out, put on a mask and always remember to get plenty of rest. If you plan on visiting grandma or grandpa lately, don't. If we can stay united and stay calm, we can overcome this virus with ease. Panic is only going to increase the spread of the virus and the intensity of the situation. So, in conclusion, no, the world isn't ending. So stop buying all the toilet paper you can fit in your basement, and stop buying all of the fucking kombucha, okay? Remain calm, cool, and collected. And as always, have a great one. I want to thank everyone who subscribed, because my channel seems to have blown up out of nowhere, and it's already gotten bigger than I would ever imagine it to. So, thank you guys. It means the world to me, really. It does. If you liked the video, give it a like, and if you didn't, give it a dislike. If you have any comments, critiques, or criticisms, feel free to share them in the comment section below. Don't forget to share this video and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more of my upcoming content. And, yeah, have a great one.